This is a little story I had told my students a pretty good while back, and I've also got some random stuff that I thought I might share with you guys and you gals and whoever else is watching. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Hope you get something out of this. I had this 80 model Ford pickup that I bought back in 1986 from a guy that had a shop over close to here, and it had been his dad's truck, and it originally came from Ohio, and it didn't have air conditioning on it or anything. But it was in really good shape when I bought it. I paid $2,200 for it, I think, or something like that. And I drove it for a pretty good while and used it a lot, and it was a pretty good truck. I eventually sold it to my uncle when I got the truck that I have now. But long and the short of it was, this was a truck that was an 80 model. First year they made the trucks, it looked like this. Before this, they had a different look about them. You might remember what the 79 models looked like, and they looked like this from 80 until 86. And then in 87 they changed to that flat front, rounded looking Ford truck, and then in 92 they changed it again. Then they changed it again in 97, and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of different generations of these trucks. But this particular one, I was driving it one day, and I was going to pick up the Ford dealership parts guy knew that I was I used to work over that Ford dealer, and he said he had a brand spanking new 7.3 liter block that somehow he wound up stuck with it, and he couldn't send it back to Ford, and the customer didn't buy it, and it was just laying there, a shiny new block. I don't know how much it cost to buy one of those, but he asked me if I wanted it, and so I said sure, I'll come get it. And so I had, on a Friday morning, I got in my truck, which I hadn't had any problem with, and I drove that thing out to the end of the street, turned onto the boulevard, and about the time I turned on the boulevard, I'm getting popping and snorting and cutting up, and it doesn't want to go. But I noticed that when I turned the key just past the on position to the start position, which powers up the white wire going to the module, which is a different circuit, it made it run really good. But when I let it back to the run position, it ran bad, and I instantly knew that was a bad module because I had dealt with these vehicles a long time. One of the funny things about working at the Ford place when these DuraSpark ignition systems were prevalent was that the module was usually what was wrong, but when the module didn't fix it, it wound up at the Ford dealer. And at the Ford dealer, we'd typically find that the stator and the distributor was opening up when it got hot. So we almost never saw a bad module at the Ford dealer because that had already been swapped out by the time it got to us. You might remember there was another one I did where DuraSpark, some of the older Jeeps had DuraSpark on them, and we had a module that was causing one of those Jeeps to drop every other cylinder, which was a really weird problem, and it turned out to be the module that was causing that. Anyway, the way these things are wired up, of course you got a resistor wire right here. You might remember Chrysler has a ballast resistor on some of theirs, and there's your the voltage drops. Whenever you turn it to start, it's basically going to bypass that ballast resistor and go directly to the coil. This is not really wired up so you can see that, but you start it on 12 and then it runs on the voltage that's dropped across here. In other words, it runs on the voltage that's left over after this resistor wire drops it. And this is taped up in the harness, which lets it carry the heat away. You remember the old coil like that. Alright, so this wire right here, the orange wire and the purple wire, are the ones that are coming from that pickup coil. The ground inside the distributor, you might that screw right there in the distributor, whenever you put that screw in there, it uses that ground to fire the primary side of the coil. That's not terribly complicated, and that's what those modules look like. Okay, so putting it slightly in start and powering this one up, which is not only powered up in start. When I powered that one up, the circuits in this module that are the start circuits enabled it to run really good. Alright, so I had noticed a few days earlier the module had given up some of its potting and it was running down the fender in there. That's kind of unusual. I don't know why that happens or how it happens unless it gets hot on the inside and it runs down. That's the only thing I can come up with. But this stuff right here was not soft and gummy. It was hard as a brick, and you couldn't hardly chip it off of there. As a matter of fact, you can see where I tried to chip it and some of it broke off, but it was just too much trouble. I left it on there. It's an old truck anyway. Okay, so I turned in at a nearby chain store, paid $22 for an off-brand module. It kind of looked a little phony and not too robust, but I says, I'll go ahead and get this one. You know, surely it'll be okay. Anybody ought to be able to build one of these if they build ignition parts, right? Okay, so when I plugged that module in, it wouldn't even start. It would start on my old module, it just wouldn't run worth a flip. When I tried to drive off, it would pop and snort and cut up. When I plugged the new module in, this thing would kick back like it had water in the distributor cap, or maybe you had crossed some spark plug wires or something. And I said, well, that's not going to work. I mean, I can't even start the truck with this one. Now, this was a while back. This was, some of you might remember that period of time when gas was like $4.50 a gallon. That was during this period of time. Okay, so, all right, so I went back into the store and the guy plugged it into the module test machine. You might recognize this. You might even recognize the brand. I'm not going to talk about the brand, the store, and I'm not going to talk about the brand of the module because I'm not here to assassinate any particular brand of parts. But the fact was, this module right here failed the test. And he goes, oh, well, this is a bad module. Let's just give you another module. And so he took that module and put it away. And what really irritates me is when they feel like you didn't know what you were talking about and they put it in the box and they try to sell it to another customer. Sometimes part stores will do that. But anyway, I went out there well, we tested his new module first and all of the green lights came on. Alright, so I took it out there, plugged it in, it did exactly the same doggone thing. Alright, so now I'm walking in there, this guy doesn't know me, I'm wearing blue jeans, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I don't have any patches on my sleeves or nothing like that. I'm not even telling him what I do for a living or who I am. He sees a guy in blue jeans and a t-shirt driving an old truck. That's all he's seeing. Alright, so I go in there and he rolls his eyes at me and he goes, you're using my parts to troubleshoot your truck. We just can't have that around here. And I said, well, why don't you come out here for a minute and I'll show you what's going on. So he came out there and I had my module plugged in, the original one, and I said, watch this. So I started the truck. Just sitting there running, you know. And I says, now watch. So I unplugged the module that was bolted onto the fender, and I plugged his module back in. And with his module plugged in, it kicked and snorted and backfired and wouldn't start. And he says, well, doesn't that module have to be grounded before it will work right? And I said, no, it doesn't have to be grounded. The orange wire and the purple wire come from the pickup coil. The ground that module uses comes out of the distributor. And that's the one it fires the coil with. And he said, well, I don't know what to think about this. I says, I'll tell you what to think about it. Your machine in there does not load the circuit like it was actually firing a coil. All it does is does some ohms and light voltage tests. I said, that's not a good machine, and it's not reliable. It's not a go, no-go test, which is what I like as a test that you can trust every time. I talked about that last week. Anyway, he gave me my money back, and I went and bought this module here, which looked a lot more like the original module. It had the blue grommet. You might remember some of these. They had different colored grommets for some of the ones that had the little MCI system on the Fords had green grommets. There were yellow grommets. So you had to have one with a blue grommet. This one was $23, worked perfectly, and remained on the truck till I sold the vehicle. Back years ago, whenever all of the cars were still driving around that had these on that were nearly new, this module was $100. But anyway, now it's down to 23 bucks. All right. So some parts are just prone to failure from the start. Everybody that's worked on cars very much has seen a 4-liter Explorer that's had one of these things fail. And they fail and they start to leak. And when you go to the parts store, you buy another plastic one just like it. I've never been a fan of running hot coolant through plastic because it seems like a recipe for disaster. Radiators can split. My advice for somebody that comes to me saying, what should I do to keep myself from having trouble? If I've got this lady had a Honda car that was a 07 model that had like 250,000 miles on it. And she'd had it since it was new, and I asked her what all had been done to it. She said, what would you do if you were me and you wanted to keep from having some kind of a catastrophic failure? One of the things I recommended to her was she replace the radiator with a really good brand of radiator. Now I will tell you, some of the parts house radiators aren't that great. I saw one of those one time that whenever you put the radiator cap on, the distance between the top of where the radiator cap goes and where the cap seal is was a little too far, and it didn't have enough pressure on the cooling system, and it would percolate and push water out even though nothing else was wrong with the vehicle. And on that one, just to verify that was what was wrong, I took another gasket from a brand new cap and put it on there and stacked it so I had 2 gaskets and gave it a little more thickness. That took care of their percolating problem. And that was one of these Chinese-made radiators from a parts store chain. But one way or another, plastic coolant, things that are plastic that carry coolant are subject to fail without warning. And just about everybody that's done very much work on a car that's listening to me talk right now has seen plastic parts that died. And typically, I remember a while back I was talking about a Buick. We had a plastic, it was threaded on one end and had a nipple on the other end that failed, and it pumped a bunch of coolant out. And we actually bought one, and that one was Chinese made, but it was steel instead of plastic. You might remember the little elbows on the 3.8 GM. They have those little plastic elbows that have O-rings on them where the water goes through the belt tensioner, which is kind of crazy. But those things, you can actually get rid of the plastic ones, which fail a lot. And a lot of the parts stores have upgraded ones that are made of metal, even if it's aluminum or something. Anyway, I found this one here for $60 online to put on my Explorer. This is my Explorer you're looking at here. And mine failed like this. That's not a picture of mine, but it's one that failed the same way. And I put this on mine. I will tell you this, I did have to do a little grinder work right here because that air conditioner bracket was in the way. But you got a high-speed cutter, you can grind it off so that it's not, and it didn't hurt anything, didn't change the integrity of the part. So I put that on there, and I feel a lot better about this pewter one, especially since I'm keeping my coolant. So another thing a lot of people don't even think about. If you wait until your cooling system is loaded with rusty electrolysis, active water and coolant, or if you're just putting plain old water in there, once it starts corroding the inside of the engine parts, that's something that never goes away. I mean, you can flush the cooling system all you want to and try to get rid of that rust and all that chalky crud, but it's always going to be there once it starts. And I like to change the coolant when it's supposed to be. I like the Motorcraft Gold on my pickup truck. It came with Motorcraft Gold, and I don't know what anybody else thinks of Motorcraft Gold. There's a lot of different opinions about stuff like that. But I've had good luck with Motorcraft Gold coolant. I had it I had an 07 Taurus for a while, and in my F-150 that I have now, I changed the coolant when it's supposed to, but that coolant goes 100,000 miles. The green coolant is what I've got in this Explorer, but it's been changed regularly. I will tell you this, I actually replaced the radiator in my Explorer with one from a parts house chain, and it leaked. And then I replaced the radiator again. They had a warranty on it. It leaked too. And I think I had to change the radiator 3 or 4 times. Finally, I bought a radiator from Ford, and I put that back in there, and I haven't had any more leaks after that. But that was a drag because that radiator is no fun to change. You got to pull it. I had to pull the stuff out of the refrigerant out of the AC system, and just lots of work, lots of trouble, lots of aggravation. Then I had to charge AC back up. But it's got brand new coolant in it, and what I'll need to do as time goes on is change that coolant when it comes time to change it. But if you keep the fluids changed in the coolant and all this, you're going to be a whole lot better off. That's playing the long game. If somebody buys a vehicle, like one of the funny things I used to see about these people that drove foreign cars when I was working at foreign car dealerships like Volkswagen, Mazda, and whatnot. If that little book that comes in the glove box, those people, when they would buy those Asian cars and those German cars, they'd have a vision for that car lasting them 500,000 miles. And they would treat that thing like it was their baby. And every single time that book had a mark that needed to be checked at a certain mileage, they had that thing in at the dealership getting it done. 30,000 mile services, for example, on Mazda RX-7s paid really good money. And we're talking about packing the wheel bearings and just all kinds of stuff that they would have you do. But any of the vehicles, if it's a Ford or a Chevy or whatever, you're a lot better off to follow the manufacturer's service instructions. But a lot of the times when people buy a Ford, a Chevy, or a Dodge, or it used to be this way, they would drive the thing without even changing the oil every 12, 13,000 miles and expect it to get the crap beat out of it and still last them 180,000 miles without ever giving a problem, But anyway, that's just another thing I noticed whenever I was doing all this work. Chinese power steering pump replacement pulleys can be too tight when you're trying to use the tool to press them on there. They'll be so tight they absolutely will not go on there. There's a buddy of mine that's got a shop over close to here, and what he does when he has one of those that won't press on there, or even before he does, he takes his little two-rock brake cylinder home, and he runs it in and out of there, and he makes it just a tiny little bit bigger, because it technically is a tolerance stack-up deal where it measures within whatever the spec is supposed to be, but it's just a shade too tight. And that's something you run into on these sometimes. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had that or not, but I've seen it. I was putting a power steering pump. Also, the shaft on a new power steering pump, if it comes from China, will be a shade too big for the original pulley. And I had one of those, and I was trying to use the tool to put those power steering pump removal and installation tools have a tendency to be expendable because they have a tendency the threads wear out and they break and all this stuff. I always put grease on the threads when you're using these power steering pump pulley tools because I've actually seen one that's really hard weld itself together where you can never use the tool again ever. But 18, 20 bucks you can buy one of these tools, and I usually keep a new one on hand so that I'll have something I can depend on. But if you grease the threads, you're a whole lot better and you got a lot more forward. Anyway, I was on a Ford 500 replacing the power steering pump because it was leaking and noisy. And when I was trying to put the original pulley back on that replacement pump, which had come from a parts store chain, that pulley got almost back on there, like about 1/4 of an inch, and it popped that puller bolt, the bolt that screws down in the center of the shaft, it popped that thing right in two. And I had to, screw that back out of there with my fingers. It was, tricky. But what I did was, I just went ahead and I think I got nothing to lose anyway. I put that thing in the press and I pressed it the rest of the way on there because the pump's made out of, looks like a block of steel anyway. It's an old heavy duty thing. And I said, if I mess it up, I mess it up. And I'm going to put this on there. I put that on there as far as I know she's still driving that one, but I had to use the press to get the power steering pump pulley on there. All right. These Chinese heater hose disconnects, these right here that you buy from the parts store, the ones that click onto your heater core like on your Fords and some of your other vehicles. On these Fords that are like 97 and newer, those heater core pipelines on some of them, on the 97, let's see, I'm trying to remember. I think that's generation 10, but I'm not sure. I had to look up that up. But anyway, the curvy F-150s that came out after the 96 model, which was 97, and it ran until like 03, I think, before they changed it. Anyway, though they'd have the doggone bulkhead so far up under there where you can feel those heater core tubes, and you're supposed to be able to take this thing and slide it on there and click it in place. Well, we got some that looked really good, because the other ones were broke and all that. And you could slide that thing up on there, and you couldn't really tell if it clicked or not, but you could it was on there tight enough where it wouldn't pull off. And I guess you could probably get a bright light and a borescope or something and look up in there and see it, but it was still hard to tell if it was all the way on there because it was far enough so that little rib around the heater hose pipe was covered up. And so we cranked it up, and about the time the thing got warm, it blew the heater hoses off because these were too tight and wouldn't go on there right. They got a couple of O-rings and a little spacer inside of them. What I wound up doing on that truck, because I couldn't trust those little things, is I took the hose and I worked it over there. I put a little bit of slippery stuff on it, and I worked it over that rib on the heater core, and so that it was, past that rib. And I put a clamp on it where the hose would pass the rib, so that you just use it like a regular heater hose with a heater hose clamp, and it never came off again. That was very annoying, but these are tight, and if you can't see that it didn't go on there all the way, you might get tricked out on that. All right, this aftermarket blower controller wouldn't fit at all. It was supposed to fit that Chevy truck that we got it for, but and I looked and tried my best to figure out a way to make that thing work, absolutely could not get it to work. It was just totally wacky. You notice the tilt of these things. I mean, when I tried to put it in there, I don't remember all the details other than the fact that there was absolutely no way I could get that one to bolt up in there and work. I didn't really care about this dadgum thing, but that's the original one, and this is the one somebody built that was supposed to work that absolutely did not work. And so anyway, that was something I had to get one of these from the dealer because at the time I couldn't find anybody else that had one. Some parts die really early, like these Chinese power steering hoses. Some of them will have a little joint in the middle of them. You know, your power steering hoses are going to have the rubber because the engine moves separately from the power steering gears. It's torquing and all. Couldn't just have a steel hose going in there because it'd eventually break. Well, some of them have got a little hinged joint that's got O-rings in it. And those things right there, what I've seen those things do is you get one of these from the parts store that happen to be made in China, and you put that thing on there, and the first time you turn your wheels to the lock to make sure it's not leaking, it blows the thing apart. And you know, that's dreadful right there. And when you've had to replace the power steering line twice, it's no fun either. Some of these Chinese front end parts, I've seen this. This one student of mine, he was kind of an aggravating student. He was a dual enrollment student, and the only time he wanted to show up for class was when he needed to work on his truck. And so he came in there and he said he had to replace his idler arm. And so we replaced the idler arm. He bought one for, I think it was $17 or something from the parts store that was one of their Chinese brand. And he put it on there, and within 2 weeks it was flopping around and worn out worse than the original one. And so he got another one just like it to put on there, and it wore out in 2 weeks too. And I said, look, if you're going to pay $17 for one of these, you may as well throw the truck in the gully, because if this comes apart, you're going to crash and burn. So what you need to do is pay 70 or 80 bucks for a Moog or one of those really good ones, so that you're not fighting with all this. Now I will tell you that the cheaper bearings and stuff, I never really can say that I had any trouble. Some of you guys may have, but buying some of these cheaper parts is just really not a good plan, especially if it's something that's safety related like that. Now here's a little quick trick. This right here is a little pulsation damper. I got this one off of a Lexus, but you'll also see these on Hondas. You'll see them on some of your Toyotas. On Toyota Camrys, there's a little plastic cap over this damper, but it's got one of these screws too. The cool thing about it is, whenever you switch on the key, that screw will move up like that. I actually pushed up on that with my screwdriver, but the fuel pressure will raise that screw, and it takes about 40 pounds of fuel pressure to raise that screw. That way, if you look at that thing with a light or even put your finger on it, somebody switches on the key, if that screw moves, you know you've got fuel pressure, provided the tank's not full of water or something. Then air pressure is not going to move that. You're going to have fuel pressure if you got that. That is a very quick way of telling if you've got fuel pressure. I one time mentioned that to the guys at the Toyota dealership, but none of them even knew about it. But that is, if you're doing a no start on a Toyota or a Lexus or some of these Hondas, if you see a fuel pulsation damper, which the pulsation damper is kind of like the injectors are clicking, it's kind of like you're bouncing on a trampoline, you see. And it keeps the clicking of the injector from being transmitted as a sound into the car. Anyway, just pay attention to that, because that's a really neat little service tip. And I don't even remember where I learned that. I think I just learned it by default by watching. I had a Lexus trainer vehicle, and I was noticing that screw would move every time it had fuel pressure. This is a random 12-second clip down the road from my house where I saw a car on fire one morning. That was really bad. What happened was, and I looked at the surveillance video that I had, that's what I took this picture of a regular camera. I guess he was a jealous boyfriend or something, he parked down there, and he put something under the car that was burning, and the car had a plastic gas tank, I guess, because as I watched that thing exploded. And I called the local 911 folks, and I says, look, there's a car on fire down here at the end of the street, and I gave them the address. To their credit, the police and the fire department were there within 10 minutes. I was really impressed at their response time. We got a great police department, a great fire department in this little town. All right. Common failure, Ford Fusion blower controller. This thing right here this is one that's just in the early stages of failing, but it actually failed and the blower comes and goes. Blowers pull a lot of current, and they heat up these pins, and whenever the pin starts to get loose and oxidize, there's voltage drop there. Where there's voltage drop, there's heat, and ultimately it breaks down to where there's no operation of the circuit at all. Had to replace several of those. That's just one I took a really good close picture of. And you'll see this. You won't just see this on Ford Fusions. You'll see it on Chevy pickups, on Ford pickups, and all kinds of stuff. Also, back in the day, you might remember the little thermal fuse that was built onto the blower resistors on some of these vehicles. They were there in case the fan was pulling current, but there was no airflow. Keep it from setting anything on fire. They would go ahead and put that thermal fuse in there, and if it got past a certain temperature because of the resistors in the blower resistor were getting hot, it would open that circuit. Sometimes those would fail just because. And so I would go to Radio Shack, and for $1.50 I'd buy one of those things, and then I'd put some little, I'd bend the ends of it. You might have noticed if you bend a piece of wire, heat doesn't travel around that curve. A welder will tell you that. You can heat a piece of wire that's bent into an L, and the heat will stop when it gets to that curve, to that L-shaped curve in that wire. If you don't believe that, give it a try. You can measure it with your temperature gun or whatever way you're heating it up. Anyway, I would bend that, and then I would put little dielectric grease on some alligator clips, and I would put them on each end of that resistor, and then I would solder a new resistor back in there. You can't just solder it in there without a heat sink, or you'll destroy it while you're soldering it in. Anyway, I fixed something like that. This is a technician error. This was on my dad's Grand Marquis. He needed a hood cable, and I had a guy in training, and I says, here, replace the hood cable on my dad's car. So he replaced the hood cable, did a great job. It opened the hood just fine. Everything was perfect. This was a mistake that he made right here. He left that out of place. The next time it rained, my dad had a floorboard full of water. If you're fooling around under the dash and you pull on a wire harness and you pop one of those grommets loose like that, and you don't pay attention and put it back, somebody's going to have a floorboard full of water. If you've got relays, the old kind of relays that used to plug into a harness under an older model pickup or car, and you plug in a relay and it's not mounted vertically, if it's hanging down, you're probably going to wind up having water running down in that relay and destroying it, because water's always going to go wherever it can. In order to fix that, all he had to do was pop that grommet in there and make sure it was sealed good when the floorboard dried out and didn't have any more trouble. We used to have to take the carpet out and hang it on the fence for a couple of days when I was at the dealership, Starter clicks sometimes. This was on a little Mazda. The guy said, sometimes my starter clicks. I looked under there and see where there was coolant that had been leaking on his solenoid, and it was running down the starter. Wound up having to fix the coolant leak, and we would put a starter on it too. Good idea to figure out what's going on so you don't have one to come back on you. Notice stuff like that. Pay attention to it. Ford Fusion popping noise. Left front, it's got two of these on it that don't look alike. That thing right there was basically, it's up in there where you can't see it. It's up in there so whenever they would turn, it would make a popping noise. And the only thing we had to do to fix that popping noise was replace that. Now, occasionally I've seen a situation where there'd be a popping or a squeaking noise, and you just tighten the ever-loving crap out of the bolts that are going through these things, and that'll take care of it. I did that on a Cadillac that had some serious popping noises. I got under there with a big brake cheater pipe and put it on the lift and tightened the crud out of everything and fixed the popping noise lady had on the Cadillac. All right, this right here was a no starter operation, no crank, on a Ford Freestar. I think it's an 05 model. And those chalky things right there, that's useless. You're going to have to get a connector, clean that up, make sure it's okay. 3 liter, severely overheated, cracked the head right there. That's kind of dull. Most people have seen that. Chevys like to fail that way just by default, even if they don't overheat. Wear your safety glasses. It's a good idea, because that right there was a girl I had in my program, and she was grinding something. And I was standing there watching her. I was wearing those $600 safety glasses because they're prescription. And when I walked away from that table where she was doing that grinding, I had that right there on my safety glasses. If I had not been wearing those safety glasses, that would have been in my eyeball. I also have a piece of steel in my leg about that far from the femoral artery because of a piece of steel that went through my pants one day when I was beating on something. Of course, I was wearing safety glasses, Clogged exhaust. Here's a go, no-go test that you can watch this happen. We had this thing mounted in there above the oxygen sensor. We pull the oxygen sensor out, put a little fitting in there, put that. You're not supposed to have any back pressure at all, and this right here had like 5 pounds of back pressure. We had to put a catalyst on that. All right, so There I was in my dune buggy in 1973. I gotta go. We'll see you guys next time.